The SANDF telling us that their soldiers are now safely at base, that they are well resourced. What do you make of that response from the South African National Defence Force?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And maybe let me start by conveying our condolences to the families of the deceased, and also wishing all those who are injured speedy recovery. Yeah, getting the soldiers out of the conflict zone is very important, and especially after this kind of encounter, it will mean that they are no longer in areas where they have to fight. They've now moved to operational bases where they basically waiting for further instructions and to recuperate. But it does not mean that if they are attacked wherever they are, they will not be able to answer. They will have to defend themselves. They are not actively participating in enforcing peace at the moment.
Yeah, certainly.
That's basically what it entails.
There must also be, certainly, I want to get to the issue of Goma in a moment, and the reports that we are now hearing, which are different to earlier reports from Sunday. But Rwanda-backed rebels claiming that they have now captured the Congo's largest city of Goma. We'll get to that in a moment. But Dr. van der Lijn, I want to talk to you about the morale of soldiers, the South African soldiers there. They've now lost 9 of their own. At least 24 more are injured. How do they regroup, get back to base, regroup, and I suppose re-establish morale?
Ooh, that's a very difficult question because I haven't been able to speak with them. But in general, I think, you know, that's a clear loss, and it's always difficult to get over that. Yeah, how can they regain that morale? I think in the end, they all know what their task is in the mission. And they will try to do their utmost to actually implement their mission, and their leadership will also support them in that. And it's a task that is not just only peacekeeping, right? I mean, the Force Intervention Brigade in MONUSCO actually also has a peace enforcement mandate, so they might actually also have to use force.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of MONUSCO. Dr. van der Lijn, I want to stay with you with just a moment. It could not have come at a worse time, the withdrawal of MONUSCO from the DRC.
Absolutely. And at the same time, this was sort of, you know, one could foresee this. The government of the DRC wanted the mission to withdraw and asked for it before the elections of, not last year, but the year before. So a bit more than a year ago. They realized that would be very difficult because, you know, lack of strength, let's say, of their own armed forces. But still, they wanted to do it to show the population that they take charge. The process of the withdrawal started last year with the withdrawal from South Kivu in April. And then, as it was after the elections, they realized that, you know, it was too difficult. They would not have enough troops on the ground. They would not have the capacity to prevent a security vacuum. So they halted the withdrawal after South Kivu. Still, 3,000 forces fewer in the field for MONUSCO. And still also the idea that in the near future, also the others would, in the end, withdraw.
Yeah. Joseph Ochieno, let's bring you into the conversation now as we talk about Rwanda-based rebels now claiming, and this is according to AP News not too long ago on this Monday afternoon, now claiming that they have captured the eastern Congo's largest city of Goma. How much of a blow is this to what's unfolding in the DRC?
Yeah, I'm not even sure whether the issue is about a blow. The issue is the concern about what's happening in DRC. And my colleagues have just given elements of intro there. If you consider the context of this conflict, when it started, then did it start a few years ago? Did it start from the time when there was some kind of peace settlement in which M23 rebels were repatriated and given homage in Uganda? And if they were given homage in Uganda, how did they find themselves all outside Uganda and then either re-enter Rwanda, re-enter Congo, and has been alleged some of them went to Rwanda? What was the political conversation that took place? What did SADC leaders say? What did DR Congo leaders say? What did East African community leaders say? And what indeed did the international community say? My concern is that this is a country that lost its founding prime minister way back in 1961. And from 1961 to date, it's more than 60 years, and it is almost as if business as usual for the region and business as usual for the continent. So sad, in fact, that South African forces found themselves not only dead, casualties dead. Indeed, true, my condolences to the dead and indeed those injured. But do we need to be able to go through this? Away from those, it's the humanitarian crisis that exists in that country, the women and children who've been subjected to this terror for decades now. So whatever the case, I know that this thing is where it is and may get worse. You're absolutely right that from AP reports, it's almost certainly the case that this will be the case where we are at the moment. The biggest concern is which direction this conflict is going to take. It's almost certainly the case anyway that this is a conflict between Rwanda and Uganda on the one side, backing the particularly M23 rebels, and a fairly weak Congolese state that I'm not quite sure whether they're sufficiently being backed and protected by their SADC leaders, because the conversation now is about peacekeeping, and even if it's peace enforcement, it's really not about authoritative, legitimate backing and supporting of a country whose sovereignty has been grossly, openly violated and exposed. And I think the international community, in my opinion, is not doing enough. My final question, where is the African Union?
Certainly. Where is the African Union, Dr. Moses Khanyile? Perhaps we can bring you back into the conversation. Congo's government saying that this advancement by M23 rebels is essentially a declaration of war. And I put this question to Joseph Ochieno as well, but how much more can this region take? It's going to, no doubt, dramatically worsen one of the longest wars on the African continent. And we saw images of women and children there walking on the streets, the local streets. Hundreds of thousands, I'm not even sure what the correct number is, of the people that have been displaced in, as you say, decades of war. What I do know is that over the past 25 days, more than 400,000 people have been displaced in North and South Kivu.
Yeah, indeed, the situation is getting worse. As Joseph has rightly pointed out, this conflict has been around for many years, and at one point it had multiple countries involved in fighting in the same country. And the recent developments are very worrying. And in fact, if it is true that Goma has fallen, it basically means that a large chunk of DRC's territory is now falling in the hands of the rebels that will complicate governance, will complicate the administration of normal administration, and also taking care of humanitarian crisis. But even more worrying is the possibility of the resurgence of interstate war involving so many other states, which therefore will complicate matters. Now, countries like South Africa will always be worried because most of the people who run away from their countries tend to migrate south, and they'll end up on this side, and that will require a lot of collaboration amongst SADC countries to stem the tide and also to bring the situation under control. It is actually also worrying in terms of the war crimes, possibility of war crimes that have been committed in that particular region with absolute impunity, and also the fact that not much, as much as there's been discussions around ceasefire between the DRC and Rwanda, which came to naught. Not much is being done in order to really force Rwanda to reconsider some of its ways, if indeed it is involved in M23.
Dr. van der Lijn, we're still saying if indeed Rwanda is involved in backing these M23 rebels. Is that still a question at this stage, just given how much territorial gain M23 has made along Congo's border with Rwanda in just recent weeks?
Well, I don't think it's a question whether Rwanda is supporting M23. If we look at the UN panel, for example, it's pretty clear that Rwanda supports M23 with equipment, possibly with advisors. I haven't seen, let's say, any proof of units, as also has been claimed by Congolese. But it's very clear that there is support from Rwanda.
So, yeah, I mean, unless there is that admission from Rwanda, it doesn't really matter that the UN is calling for Rwanda to withdraw its support of M23, if Rwanda itself won't admit to that.
Well, I think it's actually pretty clear that this is not the first time that Goma fell in the hands of M23. It happened as well in 2012, and at the time, in the end, M23 left again, in part due to US and European pressure on Rwanda, actually, that M23 had to leave. And then later on, in part, to a large extent, actually, I think, to South African efforts within the Force Intervention Brigade, part of MONUSCO, the M23 was even pushed further back. And that was militarily, but diplomatic pressure came already on Rwanda from the US and Europe in 2012, and that was effective.
Yeah.
So why not this time?
It's a difficult situation for peacekeepers. Dr. van der Lijn, I want to stay with you for just a moment. The Associated Press says one UN special representative has described the moment when Congolese armed forces, M23 Rwandan forces, entered one neighborhood in Goma, causing a lot of panic there. M23 fighters, according to this UN special representative, using people as human shields as others fled for their lives. M23 has also declared the airspace over Goma closed. Essentially, peacekeepers in that region are now trapped.
Yeah, in a way, that's correct. I mean, just like the Congolese armed forces, they're also trapped. The M23 is in control of the airport at the moment, and there is very little that then can be done to resupply or to bring in additional forces for MONUSCO. Are they trapped? Therefore, yes. But I want to, and they also have a problem actually. Beyond peacekeeping, where they would just have to stand in between of the parties, they do have the mandate to actually interfere also militarily, but they don't have the capacity to do that.
Yeah. Joseph Ochieno, as we just heard from Dr. van der Lijn, M23 has taken Goma before, back in 2012, but withdrew after a lot of international pressure was put on Rwanda. This time around, might it be harder to talk M23 down? And is it because the motives are different this time? And how so?
I'm not sure if the motives are different. I think you're absolutely right that the motivations might be now slightly much more strengthened. But it's not even all about 2012. M23 have their predecessors. When Rwanda and Uganda effectively occupied and nearly conquered Congo, it took SADC forces, and possibly then under slightly different leadership, and possibly different kind of resolve that I do not hear today, to make sure that Congo remained, an independent nation intact. I said much earlier. Some of those 2012 guys who withdrew, you were supposed to have, and indeed they were relocated and settled in Uganda. I'm asking, how did they leave Uganda? Have the Ugandan authorities been asked how these guys left their country with equipment and everything else, or did they? And what were the circumstances? I don't want my role to be that of a diplomat responding to questions somewhere around UN Assembly, because even if I was a diplomat at the African Union on matters African, I think it would be extremely irresponsible for me not to be. We know what the things are. These are political matters, and these are interest matters, and nation states are involved, and our people are involved, and it's the livelihood of African peoples here involved. And we have a few specifically bad, spoiled children this side of the continent that are not touched and mentioned, perhaps whose responsibilities in this dispute are fudged partly by us Africans, but by the other forces outside the continent. Now, I don't really hold anything specific about the forces outside Africa, because those are strategic interests, and they will do so. It's their job to come and pick whatever they want to pick, to control whichever part of the continent they want to control, and they do. And if you give them the opportunity to do so with a blank check sometimes, that is absolutely fine. But what about us, Africa, and Africans as a continent? I think what is happening in Congo, we have had genocide there, systematic genocide. In fact, leading to the 1997 war, these things had, the escalation there had been from the time of the genocide in Rwanda. In between that time, Congolese people have suffered massively and grossly. Unfortunately, I think as we are where we are today, if these things escalate, it will not only be about Congo losing an element of its sovereignty at the expense of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of lives, but it's got implications on the territorial integrity of Uganda, because this thing will go either way, Uganda and Rwanda. If M23 control this, then I think, and they've said it, that the situation may never be the same again. So the map of Congo may change permanently. Those concerned people like us. But also likewise, if possibly they lose or they don't manage to attain the object, maybe an element of status quo may be returned. But I think it's unfortunate that we go through what happened in the early 90s to mid-90s and to the early 2010s or thereabout. And we hear again on this. And as I said, I'm not hearing, I asked about the African Union. I'm doing so deliberately now, away from the African Union. I would like to hear, and I take this directly to decent, respected colleagues in the South African government, including President Ramaphosa.
Certainly.
Away from the political difficulty might have about the citizens of South Africa lost. South Africa ought to provide the leadership that is required in this region and in this continent today.
Joseph Ochieno, let me thank you for your time. He is a writer on African affairs. Dr. Moses Khanyile is Director for Military Science at Stellenbosch University. And Dr. Jaïr is a Director of Peace Operations and Conflict Management at Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. To all of our guests, thanks very much indeed. Long-running conflict in the DRC, creating one of the world's largest humanitarian crises.